I can't stop thinking about Nintendo causing so many sexual awakenings. This is a lot.
This is queer culture.
Yeah, we've got 2 out of 6 here with Nintendo experiences.
You can't see all of the Nintendo stuff that I have just out of camera here, all over my desk, on this wall here, and over there.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the CSE Soc Echo podcast. I'm Fiona, and alongside my co-host Angeni, we are here with our amazing guest to talk about the ins and outs of being an LGBTQ plus person in computer science. Thank you so much for taking your time off for this.
And so just to begin this pod off, why don't we just start with a little introduction on everyone? So if you guys could just tell our listeners your name, what you currently do, and how you identify yourself in the LGBTQ plus community. Blake, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'm Blake Morris. I'm first year in computer science, and I am gay and non-binary.
Hi, I'm Emma Krantz. I work at CSIRO, specifically in Data61 on Terrier, which is a 3D geospatial data visualization platform, fancy web maps. And I am gay and I use she, her pronouns.
Hello, my name is Alex. I work at Atlassian doing security. My job is to hack them and then show them how we did it. And I'm non-binary. My pronouns are they or them.
Hi, I'm Aaron Quigley. I'm Irish and I work in computer science as head of school. I'm gay and I use the pronouns he, him.
Cool. And also, as co-host, Fiona, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Fiona. I'm studying electrical and computer science as a first year, and I identify myself as ace, and I use she, her pronouns.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm Angeni. I'm a second year computer science student. I'm director of CSE Soc Media this year. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as bisexual, although queer, pansexual kind of cover it as well.
Yeah, now that we've introduced ourselves, we're here to discuss about our experiences of being LGBTQ plus in computer science. I just wanted to ask, do you think the current CSE culture is welcoming to the LGBTQ plus people in general?
Welcoming is an interesting word, right? Because I think it's there's a spectrum between complete hostility and then there's welcoming, and I think I've found things somewhat in between depending on who you're talking to and what day it is.
Do you find that it's similar depending on the environment, I guess, or has it changed depending on where you've been?
Yeah, I think in my current team, I'm not the only gay person in my team, so that helps. But in my last workplace, I was the token queer, and so that was, it was fine. No one was it wasn't. I didn't deal with outright homophobia or anything explicitly bad day to day, but I think, and this is probably one of the things I find the hardest, is just the pervading heteronormativity and cisnormativity as well is what I find really hard. So even if the people you're talking to are not bigots and they are nice people who generally care and respect about people, they just you're always a bit weird. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, for sure. What about, I guess, Blake, is that something that you've related to?
I haven't really had any experience with computer science as an industry outside of university, and I haven't really had any particular experiences even within computer science at university towards me being gay or non-binary, but as a whole, the university experience so far has been very welcoming, at least compared to living in the middle of nowhere, going to an all-boys high school. That was definitely not ideal. So It's a big improvement.
even if it's welcoming, or even when it's welcoming in like at university or in industry or whatever, even if people are accepting and welcoming, it can still feel like there aren't that many people like me here, or there's no one who's like me enough here. So, and like that's not their fault, right? They just happen to not be like you. I guess that's how it is being in a minority.
Rather than like welcoming, what about like, do you think like the LGBT people are underrepresented in the CS field?
I mean, I think so. Aren't the stats roughly what, like 10-15%? I don't see that many people. I don't see about, I don't know. I don't actually have stats on how many people are queer and LGBT. Does anyone?
No, it is kind of hard to tell because people are at different levels of comfort with telling other people, so you never really know.
In the sort of community of about, I don't know, let's say 20 people that I work with regularly, only 2 of them are out as anything other than straight. And as far as I know, and, you know, that's not saying much, I don't work with any trans people directly, but who knows?
Yeah. Aaron, I guess since you've been in the CS field for a while, I guess what have you been, what have you seen in terms of like representation?
I'm usually, wherever I've ever worked, I'm usually the only LGBTQI person that I've known, and I've worked in large places. Often I feel it's because I've been out for a very long time. I've been in the media because of my situation with myself and my husband. It's very, I literally can't think, and I've worked in lots of different places. I've worked in Germany, in the US, in Japan, in Singapore, Ireland, several times in Australia. I'd be hard pressed to remember another time where I worked in a school where there was another person who was visible and identifiably out. So I've always been a singular kind of representative of this community. It doesn't mean that the wider universities that I've worked in don't have broader representation. They've always had very active communities. Like the last university I worked in was St. Andrews in Scotland. There they had a very visible set of champions amongst the staff, and then also a very visible student community group. But anywhere I've ever worked, it's you're running into a lot of privacy legislation. So like now as head of school, it's never something I could ask somebody. Like as somebody's boss, this is definitely never something I could bring up. If somebody discloses it to me, I mean, and everyone knows about myself and my husband, like, and nobody cares. I mean, it's just part of our kind of day-to-day life in the school. You know, I was hired. I happen to be married to a guy. We moved here. It's no big deal. I've lived here before people know us. But I could never ask somebody about something like this. So unless somebody discloses it to you through their employment status, you would never be able to bring it up. And it's the same thing with students. It's typically a private matter. Unless somebody somehow mentions something to you, it would never be a wise thing to bring up with somebody, because it's not part of what we should be asking our students about. It's not what we should be asking our staff about, because to force somebody to disclose something that they don't want to disclose is not the right thing to do. But even I found everywhere, and I've been in academia and industry, and I've always found everywhere I've worked to be varying degrees of supportive, depending on the time. Like thinking back to like when I was first in college, like homosexuality was illegal for my first 2 years in college in the country I was living in. It's not just frowned upon, but actually illegal until 1993. So all through first and second year, this was a crime where I was living. So I've kind of gone full spectrum of it being a crime to being it part of just being kind of day-to-day life. I'm older than all of you.
I had no idea that you lived through a period where homosexuality was actually a crime. Because like you're not that old. Like it wouldn't have been that long ago.
Yeah.
But even recently, we've moved to countries and been based in countries where certain aspects of being gay is still a crime. So, you know, I went on sabbatical to Singapore, and that was still a risk. So if anything had happened to either of us during those circumstances, we wouldn't have had any protections. And it's the same. To this day, there's about 70 to 80 countries in the world where there's different forms of discrimination against LGBTQI people in different shapes and form. So where you go, your partner might not be able to come into the hospital. You might not be able to adopt. You might not have, reciprocal rights. You might not have employment rights just because somebody goes somewhere else. So there's still a huge amount of discrimination baked into the legislative systems around the world and governments. It's not a uniform set of rights. And even here in Australia, you're seeing, anti-trans legislation that's coming down the pipe all the time. So it's very easy for these things to kind of change and vary and then roll back against certain members of our community.
Going off of that, I guess, yeah. Do you think how important is it now to have, I guess out people who I guess are visibly out? Like, do you think that's an important part of I guess like your workplaces or like at uni?
No, I think normalization is very important. I think that like it sounds kind of lame and cheesy, but I actually think that like as a human being, some of the biggest positive impacts I've had on the people around me is actually by being out. And like when I was at uni, so I stayed at a residential college in Perth when I was at uni, and I was the only one I knew who fell under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella when I came out. And like people were pretty chill about it. Like it wasn't a big deal, but then sort of, and I would by no means go, it's all because of me. But I found that kind of around me, I think because queer people kind of, we tend to come in groups. Like I just like slowly my friends and sort of the people around me and more people at college started coming out. And I don't think it's like a causal thing, but I think it's sort of the more people who feel comfortable being open with who they are, the more people who feel comfortable with being open who they are. It's kind of a snowball effect. So yeah, but it's scary.
I don't know if it's like necessarily has to be workplace or university, but somewhere in general, it's good to have people who are out, because I don't know about you, but like for me, and I think for a lot of people, seeing someone else being out is what helped them figure out that they are whatever they are, right? And so maybe it's good for people to be that person to somebody else.
That point is so true. If you don't mind, if you want to like get personal, who was it for you guys that I guess like helped, like after you saw they were out, like really helped with your own coming out, I guess?
I'm here to get personal. Don't even worry about it, Jeannie. For me, it was one time at a chill house party thing, I saw a guy wearing nail polish, and I was like, where I grew up, which was like on the Central Coast, that was like highly illegal. You would have such a bad time if you did that. And I remember, I think I said it out loud. I probably should have like just thought about it first, but I was just saying my thoughts verbatim, being like, what, you can do that? You can wear nail polish and nobody like beats you up and stuff? And the guy was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just having a moment. And I was like, I'm definitely going to do that. And I did. And that was like a slippery slope into figuring out that I was non-binary. But that was what started it, was just seeing this person just doing it and nothing bad happening to them.
I didn't know gay people existed until I was about 12. Not like my parents are not like any sort of traditional or homophobic or anything. It somehow never came up. And then so in kind of early high school, I think it was about 13, 14. I didn't know anybody who was queer, like anybody. All girls high school. But I did spend too much time on the internet, and I was really into like Super Smash Bros. And like Fire Emblem and stuff. And so like it was fan art. It was gay internet fan art. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. Oh, and then of course being 14, I fell in love with my best friend. at my all-girls high school, which had a surprising number of people who weren't women at it in my year group who were in my friendship group. Yeah, so for me, there was nobody, and I think that's part of why it was so scary.
For me, it was a very similar situation to Emma, being in an all-boys high school in the middle of nowhere. I did not know a single queer person at that school, and maybe one in the entire town. So there wasn't really anyone in person, but my school counselor really helped a lot with that, and definitely online groups, specifically around Nintendo games as well.
So in college, I didn't know anybody in my family circle in Ireland. There was nobody. There was nobody around me who I knew who was gay. And that is when I started coming out in college to some of my friends. Then I got to know some of the other people when I actually lived on campus in my final year of college. But what really then helped is when I went to the year after I went to live in Japan on an English language teaching program. And that's when I came and I was then, from day one, I was just gay. So like everybody who then met me from then on knew, and it was much easier. So those kind of reset moments in life when you go to uni or you go out to the workplace or you go somewhere else, you just decide you're not going to kind of step between two different worlds, or you're not going to try to, keep it private. You're just going to say, no, I'm just going to make this decision from here on. I'm going to be, this is who I'm going to be. And everyone's, when they meet me for the first time, they're just going to have to deal with it from there on. And that was much easier. Once I went to Japan, that was really simple. Just being that new person.
Yeah, that's how I handled it. Moving to Sydney, pretty much the same.
I can't stop thinking about Nintendo causing so many sexual awakenings. This is a lot.
This is queer culture.
Yeah, we've got 2 out of 6 here with Nintendo experiences.
You can't see all of the Nintendo stuff that I have just out of camera here, all over my desk on this wall here and over there.
Yeah, Fiona, did you have a Nintendo experience?
I actually didn't, because I grew up in a lot more stricter background with my parents not letting me do a lot of things. I guess for me, gaming hasn't been essential part of my growing up. It was more of anime, considering my background of my room. Yeah. But overall, I don't really have much to input about. I didn't really have that sort of experience per se.
Yeah, are you comfortable with talking about your experience, or it's okay if we move on?
I guess my coming out experience, it was more of I actually in high school, I also went to an all-girls high school. And there was a lot of questioning within myself as well. I had a few traumatic experiences about I guess being betrayed by someone I had a crush with. It wasn't a good experience anyways, because she didn't think of me as how I thought of her. So just to clarify, I am a biromantic. I don't feel sexual attraction towards other people, but I still feel romantic relationships. I guess for me, it's kind of an experience having to fall for someone, but it doesn't come through because they don't accept you for who you are. And yeah.
Yeah. I think I don't know. It sucks. I think, especially, I think for anyone, unrequited love sucks, but it sucks a little bit more when it's kind of, it's because of who you are, and yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's possibly a pretty relatable experience. Yeah. I think I kind of also went to an all-girls private school. And what is it about all-girls schools?
Yeah, I think we can conclude that gendered high schools and primary schools are pretty terrible.
Yeah. And I was in a strangely, like, I grew up, it was in Sydney, but like my school, my year group specifically was strangely conservative. And so, yeah, like I think my initial like crushes on friends, like I didn't even know at the time because like I didn't know it was really a thing. And then I was just like, yeah, I just really like them. I just want to be around them all the time. And then I think like it was, for me, it was because of a TV show. It was The 100. There was like a queer couple. And then I was like, wait, I'm very obsessed with these two. Hey, and then like the dots started connecting. Yeah. But I think there's also the gut-wrenching feeling of like, oh, they're never gonna like me back. And it's like, yeah. And I think it's like, even though it sucks, like I think it's quite nice knowing that like a lot of it's not a rare experience. Like a lot of other people have been through similar things.
I can't even, like, it's not the same, but like I can't even count how many straight girls I've had crushes on. Like it's, I don't know. I think one of the things that I find really hard as a queer person is like there are sort of these like narratives of like things are good now, you know, people are accepting, and like, you know, one, that's clearly not the case, you know, all over the world, but even, you know, even in countries like Australia that I was about to say tend to be better about these sorts of things, but your mileage may vary. Depends greatly on where you are. Like there's still, you know, on one hand, like we have Mardi Gras and, you know, rainbows and rainbow capitalism and, you know, stores selling rainbow everything and all that stuff. But like we have like people's very real experiences, and not just older people, but like very young people who have had to deal with, you know, like being seen as other by the people around them. And I find that really hard. That sort of my parents are like, oh, but like people aren't homophobic anymore. I'm like, it's more complicated than that. I don't know how other people feel about that, or if it's just me.
My husband will not hold my hand in public when we're walking along, no matter how safe it is, how perceptually safe it might be. It's built deep into his DNA now to be very fearful of wherever we are, under any circumstances where we are, that if we were to hold hands, we might just get bashed by some random person. And I don't think for the rest of our lives that will ever change. And he's currently in the other room, probably upset with me saying that, but I know it's true. He does that whole public display of affection is not something that he can do. And straight couples can. And that's just the kind of the price of living for us. One of the small little niggles that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 25, and like I know people my age who have been beaten up for being queer. Like, it's still very real. It still happens.
And I think, yeah, to go off of that, I guess, how do you think, like, why do you think this happens, and like what can we do to sort of, like, is there like a way that things can change?
It's very hard to tell because we can only look at how it's already been, which is not ideal. So it's sort of hard to see things as changing that much.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it will end up being similar to how racism is being treated now. Like, it was a lot worse a long time ago, and it's still bad, but it's better than it was before, and it's, you know, it's still a long way to go. But like, I think the attitude's probably changed slowly now. It's like, is it most people? I don't know. It seems like a lot of people, at least that I know and talk to, like they like understand that racism is bad, right? And it's like kind of become the popular enough view. So now that like now being racist is the minority rather than the majority, right? Maybe it'll be like that. I don't know.
Something about humans, like we sort of want to put people into categories, and which is like that's just kind of humans and brains. Like we identify things, we put labels on them. That's how we understand the world. But I think as long as people sort of go, this is the majority, I'm in the majority, you're in the minority, like I think we will always have to consciously fight against, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. But at the same time, like we can see like the world is changing, like constantly in small ways. Like, I don't know, I'm not even that old, but whenever I talk to sort of like, I have friends who graduated like a few years after me from the same school, and they're like, no, like there were gay girls in our year, like nobody cared, it was fine. And like no one dared to come out while I was at school, like nobody. So like it, even in the span of this would have been 4 years, things change, which is not to say that things are all magically better and okay, but I do think it's getting better slowly. But it could, it might be like a sort of, diminishing returns over time.
I mean, it has to be part of the kind of the fabric of life. So you see now in the media, in television, in music, in popular culture, you see a much broader spectrum of people, the diversity of where you're living, and sexuality is just one of those elements that is now in the mix. And then it just becomes what younger people see, and then they just assume that it's this kind of broad blend, and that it being one ethnicity or being from some background or having a particular sexuality, that this just doesn't, it's unsurprising. The idea that it used to be surprising is an anachronism, whereas these days it's just kind of the assumption that every individual is going to be quite unique. And this sort of normative assumptions basically kind of go away, that people just don't automatically assume certain things when they meet other people. They just assume that they have to kind of build up a profile of you. They have to kind of build up their understanding of you, not just look at you and then say, oh, I look at you and I'm going to start making all kinds of assumptions about who you are. That's the problem. It's when people look at each other and go, oh, let me just try and decode you just based on your visual representation. You're like, that's a dangerous starting point in life. And I think younger people don't do that. I think younger people are more prone to wait and listen and learn and figure out who the other person is before they try to start, putting them into buckets. But that's a slow process. You're talking about an intergenerational change there. You're not talking about decades. You're talking about, hundreds of years for that to kind of become baked into societal belief systems.
That is one of the ways that the internet can help a bit, because a lot of the time you don't really have the ability to just judge someone by their appearance online. So that's one of the ways that helped me. Steven Universe made me cry
because like obviously like highly emotional show, but like it's a kid's show, and like it's not even that queer, right? Like it is, but it's not like it's not like oh yes, this is my wife. Like it's still very low key, trying to get past censor boards until the later seasons, which I don't think I've seen yet. But like I watched an episode where I can't even remember what it was, but it made me cry because I was like, this is a kids' TV show that like, it depicts queer relationships and sort of like, different representations of gender other than male, female. And like it's a kids show, and like, it's not the only one either. Like that blows my mind. And so I think, yes, the children are our hope, in the sense that, like education is just so important in terms of, teaching, rather than having to like learn the wrong thing and then unlearn it. Teaching people the right thing in the first place, don't be racist, don't be sexist. Like, I think that helps. So I think through positive representations of me in media is like a huge way that, the world is slowly shifting.
Yeah, because people can't like control their, I guess their immediate surroundings. Like if you have a bigoted family, like you're kind of stuck with that. But you can see good things like people like you on TV, and that helps a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like specific to tech, I'm gonna embarrass her, but Nikki Ringland, right? When I met Nikki Ringland, Dr. Nikki Ringland, who is a fellow woman in tech, and I would have been 17. I was at the National Computer Science Summer School. Like, I had never really seen women in tech before. Like, I'd never, you know, I was the programmer nerd kid. You know, my dad wrote code, I wrote code, some of my dad's friends wrote code, and they were all men, and that was kind of it. And so to meet someone like Nikki, who is also just wonderful generally, but like is super good at what she does, was mind-blowing for little 17-year-old me. And I think that probably, like, it sounds cheesy, but like seeing people who I could identify with doing stuff in tech, like, made me see it as a thing that I could actually do rather than a thing that other people did, I guess.
What about, I guess, how I guess seeing like the first welcoming person is like is such a nice thing that helps us, I guess, like feel a little bit more welcome, feel a little bit more okay in our communities. What about I guess just in CS, in computer science in general? Have you been able to like find communities of like other queer people in computer science?
So I work in the area of what's called human-computer interaction. And for the last few years, at our large Chi conference that we have, we've had a get-together of LGBTIQ and allies also have come along to that. And that's a community of maybe about 100 people who come. And in the last couple of weeks, there's been a push to create a mentoring program within that group, because just this year, I was actually the general chair for the conference, and we had 5,100 people. So you have 100 out of 5,100. So it's a small minority. When the conference used to be physically held, there was a party. There used to be kind of a get together where people would mingle and network and kind of build up those groups. But it's a fairly small group out of a larger group that only met once a year, but now meets more regularly online, and we'll have a mentoring program. But apart from that in computing, in my experience, I've never seen anything as a dedicated group emerge, because our numbers are just so small typically.
Yeah, there is a queer or LGBT, etc. Group at Atlassian where I work. I haven't like been following it. I think I joined the Slack channel one time, but I know it is there. But that was only when I started working. When I was in uni, I did end up finding my friends, a lot of like friends were queer, but I didn't find like an official queer community. You just kind of either just accidentally be like, oh, that's strange, I get along with these people really well, oh well, or you just kind of can tell and you try and seek out the people who look like they might be like you. But there wasn't anything official in uni.
We have like informal get-togethers at work. There's sort of a secret, it's not really secret, but like a mailing list. But like, I don't know. I think my strategy is to be unapologetically queer, and then people tend to sort of feel more comfortable coming up to you as a fellow queer, and so you at least like in your immediate environment are more likely to find the people who are like you. But yeah, I mean, I know Alice, but yeah, like, you know, there's one other gay software engineer in my team, but like he is the only person I've ever really worked directly with, like day to day. So yeah, I have lots of queer friends, but not so much queer work friends.
So like thoughts on like just adding on to that, what are your like thoughts on like hiring for like culture and diversity within like a workplace compared to like pure technical skill in CS?
Like in terms of suppose, if you feel like, do we need to be hiring for diversity? I guess maybe Aaron, because I guess you are in charge of hiring at this point.
We definitely do hire for diversity. So when you actually get into an interview process, for example, the last round of interviews we had for the education focused people that we hired, we recruited 5. We had 270 applications. So when you're actually doing the shortlisting process, technical skills are just one facet that kind of gets you the first, 80 set of 80 people out of that 270. Very similar sets of skills, very similar kind of career levels, and then you get down to start looking at all kinds of other experiences in terms of work, in terms of engagement in activities, and in all the other descriptions of what you're looking for in the role. So in the role description that we have, you probably map about 20 to 40% of it as being technical skills, but the vast majority of the rest of it is much broader sets of skills that you're actually looking for when you're recruiting. One of the ways I did it the last time was because we were trying to redress the balance in terms of gender identity that we have within the school. I just basically took a large energy and effort to reach out to all of the women in computing groups that represent these sets of people around the world, and that was the first set of energy that we put into it. So that ended up working quite well. But you have to kind of make a conscious decision when you're recruiting as to where you're going to put in energy into the recruiting process. These days, actually, within the university, if you're hiring a senior person, you won't be able to go to interview unless you have a broader representation. Like if you were to try and do an interview panel and it was all people who identified as male, you wouldn't even be allowed to get to the interview process itself, let alone try to do recruitment. There's already the expectation that you'll have a certain level of representation. And it's the same thing on the interview panel as well. Who the people who are actually on the interview panel also have to be more representative. It's all about who you want to be in the future. That's the point. We know in computing right now, it's not where we want it to be. So we just set our targets, we set our sights. I'd like to have us at more like 40% when it comes to the staffing. But even if we were to try to target 40% of staff, that could take us, given the current rate of recruitment, that could take us 12 years because the turnover is just slow. We are where we are in terms of percentages. And even if we grow, it would take 12 years of just recruiting women to try to get us up to just 40%. So it's a slow process to redress this balance. But we have certain mechanisms that we actually do employ, and they do work, but it's slow. That's the thing. It's a very slow process.
I was a diversity hire. And in that, my not at CSIRO, but my boss told me well after the fact, months after the fact, that he had specifically. So this was a grad position, and he specifically all of the grads that he'd had working with him before had been men, and he thought that was probably not great, and so wanted to do better. And so when he looked at the shortlist and the top couple of candidates, and he had to pick between candidates who are men and candidates who are women, because those were the terms that he saw the world in. I don't think his brain was ready for non-binary people, unfortunately, but he sort of picked the women, which I don't think that's an inherently bad approach. I think, if you have a shortlist and you don't know anything about the people in the shortlist, apart from they all have the same skills and the only differentiating things are their genders, and you have a team full of men, it kind of makes sense to, I don't know. I think the way that he framed it in his conversation with me was maybe a bit needlessly brutal, but I do think that things I get pulled into hiring panels a lot because I am a female software engineer and there aren't many of us around in Data61 at the moment, because they don't want someone to face a hiring panel entirely of mainly white men, stuff like that. I think stuff like that helps, and the stuff that Aaron mentioned helps. But also, like, so many dimensions of diversity are invisible. Like queerness is invisible most of the time. Like it's pretty hard to look at someone and go, aha, you're a queer, unless you have bright purple hair.
Unnecessary, uncalled for.
That is just my lighting. I can change that.
Me too.
But yeah, I think like we have to, and I think again, like that goes to some of the stuff that Aaron's talking about, like thinking about like how you write job descriptions is actually a huge thing. Of course, like a lot of companies these days have like the blurb at the end of the job ad description that's like, we are interested in hiring people from diverse backgrounds. We love diversity, which like great. But in terms of like, I don't know, there's the statistic that like women are much less likely to apply for a job if they don't meet all of the requirements, whereas men, and this has only been studied on women and men as far as I know, are more likely to like meet some of them and apply anyway. So, having a little notice at the end of your job ad being like, do you meet most of these? Apply anyway. Making sure like the language that you use isn't super gendered and like all that sort of stuff, I think does help a bit. But like Aaron's right, like it's a needle that will only shift very, very, very slowly, but it will shift, and it, I think, hopefully is shifting. I don't actually know.
I will say actually one thing about these like little blurbs that you put in, the actual ripple effect from those can be really quite important. So with some of the other heads of school in computing in Australia, we've been having discussions for the last few months about how we can do things to mutually support each other. And one of the things we all identified is that there's this massive over-reliance on metrics, and how people just, the first thing they do is they introduce you to say, oh, I have 4 papers that are A star, and I have 3 papers that are A, and I have 2 that are B plus. And you're like, tell me something important and impactful about any one of those pieces of work. So we're trying to turn the dial around. We're trying to say, look, just tell us about why this piece of work is important, and then worry about, where it's actually been published in terms of the metrics. Don't just come in and say, like, I've got 3 red beans, 2 blue beans, and a green bean. Therefore, I am going to get myself a magic tree that's going to take me up to the next level of paradise. So, but because we in UNSW, as soon as I had this discussion, I thought, look, I'm not going to wait for others. I'm just going to put this blurb into our new ads. I put it in. We put it into several of the ads. Lots of people start talking about this online as like, oh, look at UNSW. They're decoupling from that way of thinking. And then other universities are now actually starting to adopt this language. So these little blurbs that you put in for one reason actually can have a very rapid and ripple effect across the entire sector and across an entire industry. So I think that is actually key. Like the recruiting process is the place where you can make a systemic change for good, and then other people can see what you're doing and going, oh, that's a good idea, we can do that too, and then suddenly it ripples out quite fast. So I think recruiting and being first to kind of take leadership in some of these ideas is very important.
A situation sort of like this where we were trying to, disclaimer, I'm not in charge of hiring anyone, and this is me talking, I don't even know what Atlassian's takes on hiring are. We were trying to hire 3 people to start a new team, but we wanted to join me on a team. And there was like, kind of like when you're assembling people to perform a heist, we wanted everyone to be very specialized and have their own thing and all be very different from each other. So we could all like have different ideas and argue about it and try and find the best idea. But that was sort of the most important thing. And so we were like, we want to hire a like diverse team. We know the research is showing us that diverse teams perform better, but what does that mean? What we realized is like, what it means is like people having different ideas perform better than like 5 people having the same idea at each other. So when people have different ideas. And so we were like, we don't really care like what kind of, we really the thing that we care about is that like their diversity of thinking and the diversity of ideas, right? And we can't really infer very much from someone's application. We can maybe guess that they're a woman or not. That's kind of the best we can do. And like, so we realized like, okay, we're going to have to just hope like getting people to apply will be like getting the like different people to apply will be hard. And then in the interview process, we'll just have to like try and see how differently their like ideas and thinking are to everybody else who's applied. And like, this is going to be hard. And like, overall we did do it, but or we did something with we don't know who we didn't hire, right? But we realized that it was about the diversity of thought and diversity of ideas and stuff, which is sometimes represented in like physical attributes or attributes you can tell about someone, but like you were saying, Emma, often it's totally invisible and you can't tell. You just have to test it in the interviews.
I think it kind of, a lot of it comes back to like people tend to sort of gravitate towards people who are like them. Like I know I do. Like I know if I'm at a party and I see someone else wearing a flanny, I want to talk to them. And like I think that's human and all, but I think we need to challenge that, right? And like actually seek out, working with people who are different to us and hearing different ideas, because, as every news article I've read on the subject shows, like living in a social media bubble where everyone says the same things that you agree with over and over again is bad for you. And so, even if you can't like look at someone and go, yes, she is wearing Doc Martens, she is a lesbian, which is less true than it used to be. Right now everyone
wears Doc Martens.
right. Everyone does. But like when I was a teenager, it raised the likelihood that the person wearing Doc Martens was a lesbian. When I was a child. So I think if you sort of focus on trying to challenge your internalized assumptions about things and listen to the people who are different to you, even if your brain doesn't automatically do that, you will probably by many metrics end up with a better result for everybody.
I've totally had that experience you're talking about with like being at a party and being like, I definitely want to talk to this person. And then the first time I went to like a queer party, like a public event where like everyone was queer, I was like, it's something, usually there's only like, one or two people at the party that I want to talk to, but it's like everyone here is that kind of person. That's weird. I wonder what it could be. And eventually I was like,
I guess, we've all been talking about how the workplace like has sort of like, we're trying to make a conscious effort to sort of like hire for like, I guess, different ideas and different ways of thinking. Has that sort of like, do you think that slowly helped make workplace culture, I guess, like more welcoming, I guess? Or have you seen that change for the positive, or is it like too early to tell?
So I've worked in, places like Japan where it's very singular type of culture, and similar in Singapore where there's a little bit of some foreign, influence there, or even in Scotland where there's kind of a little bit of a blend of some European, but largely a kind of a local culture. So I've sort of seen different samples of blends. Australia in computer science here in UNSW is ethnically very blended, cultural backgrounds very blended. People from who are from Australia, who are not from Australia, people who are from Sydney, who are not from Sydney, very blended. Still, our representation of women is low, but many of those blends are quite present already. And some of the things, of course, it means is it stops people making assumptions about lots of things that they would make assumptions about where I've worked in the past around, what people are doing for their families, what people are doing around religious holidays, what people are doing with respect to how their family structures are set up. So that's quite nice. There's no baseline where everyone says, you're one of us, therefore you're doing X, Y, Z. That doesn't exist because everyone knows everyone's family and background is so different. You just can't make those assumptions. So that's probably why it is actually easy for myself and my husband to kind of fit in, because we're just another kind of variant of what's already quite a diverse set of situations people have. Like people have older relations living with them here, people have their kids living with them here, they do or don't, they're partly living here, they're partly living in other places. There's so many diverse elements within our school already that it just makes such a kind of a mixed pot that when we come along, we're just another slight variant on the already very mixed up kind of space that we have, which I find quite nice and kind of liberating, because you don't come in and then people make certain assumptions about your religion or your family background or anything like that. That never happens here, because people already know it's so diverse in so many of those different dimensions. People would just they know they'd be wrong to try to guess, so they don't.
Yeah, that's definitely something you can see a lot of contrast even within Australia. Tamworth is a very boring place in terms of diversity. So whenever I come to Sydney, it's a lot more interesting.
I worry about a lot is like I've never reported directly to someone who wasn't a man. And I don't think, as far as I know, actually, I think there was one point where there was someone in the reporting chain between me and the CEO who was a woman for a little while. But like the thing that I worry about is like the people in positions of power, like even if sort of the sort of more junior, less experienced people are more diverse, the people in positions of power, like it seems to get more diverse the further you go up in the chain, and the people making decisions, you know, are more likely to sort of be in a position to deliberately or accidentally entrench, you know, outdated assumptions about what people are good at. Yeah, so I think like it has to be getting better, right? But like I you know, there's a huge, people talk about this a lot, but like there's the retention problem of women in tech, how like, you know, there's the supply problem, but there's also the retention problem where they leave. Or I've noticed, and this is purely anecdotal, but like most of my friends who are not men who work in tech work at companies like Google and Atlassian. So they go work for like the big giant tech companies. And that's not actually a bad thing. You know, if those are the good places to work, they should go to the good places to work. But I think that like, I don't know, like I would like to say that I've seen it getting better, but I personally haven't. And I, you know, until I start seeing people like me in positions of power, that's when I will know that things are changing for the better.
Alex, it looks like you're thinking about that.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about like, I was like, oh yeah, for a while my manager was a woman and it was great. And I was also thinking about how you're saying it gets more diverse as you go higher up the chain. As in people who are in higher like positions of more authority tend to be more diverse. I have not noticed that in
no.
Like, oh no,
I meant the opposite. Sorry.
Oh, in that case, I have noticed that, and yeah, big agree.
Yeah,
because like a lot of the software engineers I know are not white, for example, but all of the more senior software engineers that I have ever known have been very white.
I think I guess also steering it back to, I guess, like more with being queer, I guess like, does that also mean like I don't know, is it something that's even like discussed in the workplace, like queerness?
It doesn't, like, no one has ever sort of asked me about queer things or even suggested or even like been like, oh, Alex, do you? And then like long pause, like no one's done anything like that, because I think because it's a workplace, or maybe it's because they're too afraid of the answer, but I think it might be because it's the workplace and, you know, you're kind of not allowed to do that, kind of not allowed to ask those things that people, especially if you're in a position of authority over them. But like in general, like they sort of have to bring it up. And so
absolutely. I've never seen people bring it up with me. It would be for them, they could get fired for bringing that up. I mean, that's not something that they need to know about me for me to be able to do my job properly. If I offer it as a piece of information and then they happen to know it's part of who I am, like in UNSW, like the dean will know because I've invited him over to have dinner with myself and my husband. All the other heads of school know because they've been over here to have dinner and barbecue as a group. But unless I offer that piece of information up, nobody would know that. And for me, I could never ask somebody about that kind of information. Most of these what are called protected characteristics, they have to stay protected, because if I was to ask somebody, even though I'm just asking in a kind of a polite, casual, social way, the people would then think, oh, Aaron's now going to use that information when he's deciding on who to do a piece of work or who to kind of involve in a grant or something. And again, I don't want to know this information because I don't want it to seep into my thinking and my decision making. So you just don't ask because you don't need to know that information, therefore you don't ask.
Yeah, it's tricky when people sometimes, like, maybe they're not meaning to, but they accidentally ask in sort of like a subtle way. They're like, oh, so did you go to Mardi Gras or something? And it's like, it's like, oh, if I say yes, what does it mean? If I say no, what does it mean? What do you, like, we have to really try and like download their entire consciousness into your brain and try and figure out what it is they're asking, which is too hard a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like when people, not my current team, but the moment that I came out to the people at the last company I worked for, I think it was when they asked me if I had a boyfriend. And I was like, no, I'm gay. And like, yeah, like very much like, because cis and heteronormativity are so pervasive, like people just, you are straight until proven gay. And so it I don't know, like I may be weird because like the team I work with are really, really close knit. Like obviously we don't like, we don't have in-depth discussions about sexuality over like work lunches, but like it's definitely like, I felt comfortable sharing my experiences about queer things, and people have like, engaged in polite conversation about that as, talking to a human being who's talking about something that you're interested in. But like, no one has, I don't think anyone has ever walked up to me in a workplace setting and been like, are you a lesbian?
Do people do that to you outside the workplace? Does that happen very much?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it happened to me in high school and at uni a bit. Not in a, I like to think people grow up. I think they do, but not even in a sort of, if you're a lesbian, if you answer wrong, I'm going to punch you. But in a, that's so weird. Tell me about lesbian, like people, I don't know, people like typical dude bros, basically. Yeah. I don't know. I also just like, I maybe fall on the evangelical side of queer because I just think that someone has to. Like, I think it does good in the world to be loudly gay in public. Even if it's like, it is scary. Like, it's not, I think I come across as a fairly confident person, but like most confident people, I'm not particularly confident. It's just that someone has to, I don't know. I want to be the person that like little baby 12-year-old me didn't see.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it, because that it's like it would have helped you earlier. So why not be that person? I think it's also interesting to me because like as a student hearing that like it's like in the workspace, like this is such a taboo topic. Is that reflective of, I guess, like, do you think there's like a little bit of a fear of like being discriminated, or is it's just like not something you believe that even if we have like, if people weren't bigots, like even like then it's just like not relevant to the workplace? Is that the case?
I think it goes both ways. I think like partly it's like, sometimes it's illegal to ask or illegal to know, but also sometimes I think people don't want to talk about it because people, they don't want to ask because they don't want to get in trouble they don't want to seem like they are like being discriminatory, even if they're not. Like I remember one time at work, the guy asking me, I think fairly instantly, like, oh, hey, like, oh, you're wearing nail polish. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you wearing nail polish? And I was like, oh, I don't know, it's just good. I just like it. And I realized the guy like kind of froze up a bit and was like, oh, wait, it was like, okay, yep, cool. Was realizing like, oh, I can't actually ask about this because maybe you might think that I'm like not accepting this, and so on and so on. So like, I think that's one of the reasons it gets talked about less.
That happens to me a lot, actually. Where like people will say something and then they'll be like, oh, wait, sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I'm not homophobic. And it's like, on one hand, it's really nice that people care. It's really nice that people want to go out of their way to not make other people uncomfortable. On the other hand, it's like, can we just not make a thing of this? Can we just move on? Like, I generally, like, I don't know. Most of the people I work with are lovely, and I'm not going to immediately interpret the things that they say as homophobic, because they're not. Yeah, it's definitely, yeah, I run into that one quite a bit, actually.
And I guess, like, Alex, like, is it, if your, like, coworker had to, like, ask, are you, like, out as non-binary at work?
Yeah, yes, sort of. Like, there's that like I don't really talk about it much. It doesn't really come up, right? People don't really ask about it. It doesn't really happen when they at some point they, like, my work added a feature to, like, put your pronouns in your Slack something on your profile, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm out of work now. But, like, that was kind of it. That was kind of all there was to do.
Yeah. Okay. And Blake as well. Are you, I guess, like, out at uni, or, like, just in gen?
Yeah, pretty much the same as Alex. I don't care enough to be upfront about it, really. Like, if there's an option to put pronouns in my Discord profile on a certain server, then I guess I'm out there.
And I think I also just definitely wanted to touch on, like, misgendering in general, because especially with Blake, I was Blake's camp leader at first year camp, and I, like, during that whole time, like, I once Fiona, like, was like, oh, I know Blake's non-binary, like, they would be really good on this podcast. I was like, I didn't know that. I was your camp leader at a like, at a camp where it's supposed to, like, a welcoming place, and, like, it just, like, never, like, I think it's a product of yeah, like, it was, like, a massive oversight that, like, just at that place no one, like, asked for pronouns, and then so you weren't, like, no one else could have, like, specified either. So first of all, like, apologies for that. And yeah, do you think, like, it's something that's, like, necessary, like people can do better?
I think, like all things, it is something people could do better in, but I don't foresee that happening for a long time. So it's not something that bothers me, because if it did, I would get bothered a lot, and I don't have the energy for that. So I guess it's just something that you just deal with, and it is what it is.
Alex, do you feel that like, I guess, like, similarly, because, like, again, like, you've been in the media a lot, and I've, like, also noticed they don't really go for I've never seen them being used there.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I don't explicitly tell them. Oh, I think actually, no, I did. I went on this one podcast, and, like, the host, like, recorded the whole thing and sent me, like, the preview version. And it was like, hey, is there anything you want to change? And there was a few things I was like, oh, he's high quality audio and stuff. And one of them was one of the things I was like, oh, also, like, I prefer they, them pronouns. And, like, yeah, it was all he, him in the podcast. And I was like, but, I also understand, like, since you've recorded this whole thing, you're going to have to record it all again. Like, if you want to publish it as it is, that's okay with me. Like, I'm fine with that. And the guy was like, oh, no, totally, it's okay. And, like, redid the whole thing with, like, different pronouns. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. And that's so, that's so inclusive. But also, I understand when people, like, either if they don't know, like, if you don't tell them your pronouns and they just, like, guess based on looking at you, like, what else can they do? Like, I understand they're not, like, trying to hurt me. They're not trying to, like, invalidate me or anything. They're just, like, doing their best. Or, like, even when they do know your pronouns and they just accidentally do the wrong ones. Like, I also have talked to non-binary people and call them they pronouns, and it's hard. Like, your brain gets it wrong sometimes. Like, you're not trying to, like as long as someone's not trying to, like, call me the wrong pronouns on purpose to be like, yeah, what are you going to do about it or something, which would be a weird flex. But as long as they're not doing that, like, I understand, because it's hard for your brain to do that,
Yeah, I definitely agree there. You can't expect people to use the right pronouns if you don't tell them. So it's kind of just like that. And sometimes when people have gotten it wrong, I've got, like, messages on Discord that people are, I'm so sorry. Like, it is good to see that people do care, but it's not really something that you need to make a big deal out of.
Yeah, that's nice to, and then hopefully I just see it more often, like, people, like, specifying their pronouns, and I think that definitely helps, because yeah, I like, as Blake said, like, it does take energy, right, to always, like, correct people and stuff. So and it's not something that you should be, like, expected to do, like, all the time.
It is sometimes forcing people to out themselves, though, which can be very uncomfortable. Everyone says, "Oh, let's all use our pronouns," and people are like, "I'd rather not, because I'm not comfortable with this particular group of people who I don't know being forced to give you my pronouns. I don't quite know how people will react."
There are definitely times where there has been stuff like that, and I have just come out as not being non-binary, sort of, because I didn't particularly want to.
Do you think that cis people, like on Twitter, particularly on Twitter, I've noticed that people tend to put their pronouns in their Twitter bio. Like, do you think that like cis people announcing their pronouns helps, or does it just not help at all? And is it cis people being performative allies?
No, it helps, because like I think
it definitely.
I think it's just like people put their pronouns there because they want people to know what to call them. This is like when I talk with the person, what should I say? And it's nice to not have to guess, even if it seems obvious. Some people think it's obvious, but then it's not. So yeah, I think it's fine to put them there. I don't think it's performative.
Even if the intention is to be performative, it still helps.
That's true. Yeah, I guess I can't tell why they're there.
I guess it's also part of the normalizing thing, like just normalizing specifying pronouns might make it more comfortable. Also, I wanted to circle back to Aaron mentioning, one, you mentioned that you've been in the media because of, I guess, your sexuality. And also you mentioned that your husband was uncomfortable, I guess, like holding your hand in public. How do those, I guess, like, how do those like two come together? Like, have you found that difficult?
Yeah, I mean, Brad, that's my husband, he's actually Australian. We met here when we were in college. But because we then went to live in Ireland, he was only able to get a tourist visa to come with me for a year. And we had to actually appeal to the government to be able to allow him to stay with me beyond his 1-year tourist visa. And then a year later, when we get that renewed, we have to basically show that we've been a partner. So in the end, then the Gay and Lesbian Unions for Ireland association that we were part of, the Irish Independent, the Irish Times, and the other newspapers basically covered us. And then they came to interview us and they videoed us, and we were in various newspapers. And there's this line which was, we had to keep our bills for 7 years to show that we were an established couple. And actually that has repeated itself again and again, because we've had to kind of go through this kind of putting forward a case that we're actually an established couple. More than once, every time we've moved to different places, it's reoccurred. And to this day, that folder I have of all of this kind of paperwork that actually shows we're a couple, we're a relationship, continues, even though this is our 10th anniversary of getting married this year coming up. And even now we still have that, because I'm always afraid eventually we're going to stumble into some jurisdiction where they don't care that we got married in Scotland, and they're going to want a whole bag of paper. And it basically, it's about stepping up and being, and I think Emma said earlier, like that, to be that person, that 12-year-old version of yourself that sees you in the newspaper or sees you on TV and goes, oh, well, there's just a very regular, a gay person, and they're just living their life and they're just doing something. And oh, they're a computer scientist. Oh, wow, I'm interested in computer science. Oh, there must be lots of gay people. Oh, there's lots of gay people everywhere. And you're like, and it's just that kind of, you want to be that person who you would like to have seen when you were young, to just realize that this is very unsurprising and very boring. In the article, I said, like, Aaron and Brad come home, their gay Christmas tree twinkles gaily as they make their gay dinner, and they're baking their gay cookies and they're having their gay dinner. And I remember saying this to the journalist, and my husband was sitting there going, don't say this, this is going to be in the article. I'm like, it's funny because there's some people who still think, like, all of these other aspects of who you are means, oh, everything about you is now like, you're totally different. You're like, no, most of the time, most of what we do is very regular. Like, we get up in the morning, we eat, we cook, we socialize, we do all of our stuff. And this is just one aspect of who we are. And yes, it maybe permeates us in different ways, but it's just like everything else. It doesn't define you as an end-to-end individual. It's just one facet of your life. So I think it's kind of funny that people just kind of they see you as a gay person, and they've seen all of these fragments from the media, and they think, oh, well, you must like this and this and this and this. You're like, no, that's not how being gay works. It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, just adding on to that, like, what is it like when gay marriage was legalized?
in different places. So the first time when we actually did have our first ceremony, it was only civil partnership. And then 6 months later, they actually changed it to having gay marriage in Scotland. And then we were able to go into the registry and they backdated our civil partnership to be a marriage. Because we actually, myself and my husband, we rented a train and we took everyone on the train that we rented, and we had 36 people go up into the Highlands of Scotland, and we stopped the train in the middle of a field and we had our ceremony with harpists, and then later in the evening we got up and we had bagpipers and we were out on the train platform having a ceilidh. So we were in the London Times. They announced our wedding in the London Times because it was such a unique experience that the two of us actually got to have. But I mean, apart from that, to this day, all of our friends and family will still say it was the best wedding they ever were at, because in every way that it mattered. You were marrying the person that you loved, your friends and family were there, you had a ceremony, you had cake, you had, music, you had food, you had too many gifts, you had too much hangovers. In every way that it was to be getting married, it was being married. And that's just nice. So that's nice now that, and we were living out of Ireland, for example, when the marriage referendum happened. But that was so lovely. Because 10 years before that, we'd have to kind of write to the minister to just beg to allow Brad to be able to stay. And then 10 years later, they were having a public vote, and you could just watch. And all of our friends and family were out advocating for it. And it was getting people's grandmothers to vote for it. So that's really reaffirming when you see that happening. But still to this day, the number of countries in the world where you can, marry your partner is very small. So there's still a huge number of countries out there where we're very lucky in Australia, we're very lucky in Ireland, very lucky in the UK, but that's not uniform across the world. So I think that is why this generation of people still has to put in the effort to kind of be advocates and to kind of show that this is just very regular. This is just part of life, very unsurprising, really. And everyone should have these rights around the world. They shouldn't just be exclusive just because of who you are and the sexuality that you have.
What about, I guess, I'm assuming that the rest of the guests, none of us are married yet. But even so, I guess because I remember the day the marriage plebiscite got announced, I remember that day very vividly. I guess, is that sort of experience sort of shared by anyone?
Yeah, that was one of those things that led to a discussion in my English class, and I was not out then. So that sort of happened a lot, and it's quite awkward, but it worked out well.
Yeah, it's when you're not out, but you did it feel awkward in the sense that you spoke too much? Did it feel like you were going to out yourself? Was that the feeling?
Oh no, I did not speak at all. I just let things happen. Yeah, It was Tamworth, and that school in particular was definitely not a place that I wanted to be out in.
Yeah, because what was sort of being said in that English class? Was it positive or was it some negative as well?
I think everyone there was sensible enough to not say anything outwardly negative, but still just the awkwardness of being there, knowing that people are indirectly talking about me while they don't know it. It's just a weird feeling.
Yeah, because same thing happened at my school. I also went to a religious school, so there were people who I guess what it did is there were people who were against. They were very outwardly against, and I guess they felt validated in that, and then so they were quite loud about it. That being said, there were also people very loud about being for it. But yeah, it was a bit, because at that time I was out to my friends, but I don't know, it's the whole school. I wasn't that close to all of them. It's not I was particularly keen on telling everyone. So yeah, it was just when people get very heated, it's just kind of you kind of realize they're just talking about me, but they don't know about it.
Yeah, it's I do not want to be here right now, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I remember that day at work really clearly, not necessarily, people weren't homophobic or anything, but people were everyone wanted to know what I thought as the spokes gay. And I felt I don't know. Like I just wanted to have a normal work day. Like sometimes I don't want to be the spokesgay. Sometimes it's fine, and sometimes I just want to quietly mourn the fact that we have to put this thing up to a national vote in peace. And I don't know, like people are fine. A lot of people came up to me and they're like, I voted yes. And I'm like, cool. No, it's good. It's nice that like people wanted me to know that they weren't raging homophobes, I guess. Like it's yeah. But like I personally know, this is kind of a funny story. I was like vaguely like friendly acquaintances with this one guy. I discovered like later that he was an active no campaigner and didn't know that I was gay. And so next time I saw him, I like casually let slip that I was a lesbian. And now ever since, he won't make eye contact with me or stand within a meter of me. And it's the funniest thing. Yeah. So yay, having a vote on people's personal lives.
Imagine living somewhere on the day when they decriminalized being homosexual and watching what they were saying in the media and what the people in the churches were saying and what people's family who didn't know you were gay were saying to each other about what all the gay people are going to start doing in society now that it's been decriminalized. And wasn't it a terrible thing that Ireland couldn't hang on to this? Because of course this was at the same time where, you know, you couldn't get condoms and there was no abortion and there was all kinds of other limited rights. And only a generation before that, you know, I think the year I was born, if my mother had been working in the civil service and she got married, she would have had to quit her job because you couldn't be a married woman and also hold a job in government because you'd be taking that job from a man. So you go back in time and it's like, it's tortured things that have happened to so many people. It's a ripple of, you know, awfulness when you go back in history.
I think a lot about the AIDS crisis and the fact that like, in many ways, like we lost a lot of that generation, and how like, you know, these stories from older gays, like obviously, you know, we survive, they survive, but like there's sort of this gap, I guess, like of sort of lived experience and culture and stories of like all of these mainly men who died from AIDS. Like, I don't know, it's sort of this great big gap in queer history. I mean, obviously, like it's not, gay men do not make up the entirety of queer culture, but I think about like, you know, hearing stories of like, there are lots of stories about queer people growing up, but there would be more stories about sort of queer experiences and queer people growing up, going further back in time. And I think, again, like there's sort of the sort of weird, I don't know, again, like I wasn't around then, but I think there's kind of the weird disconnect between like, you know, today, like the world has changed so much in so little time that it's really hard to sort of connect, sort of, you know, if you lived through these horrible things and saw so much homophobia, Aaron, you might be able to talk more about this. It like, I think it might be hard. I know I find it hard comparing like experiences from when I was a kid to experiences now. And like the world has changed, but like I still lived through the bad stuff. You know, that still happened, even though it's not happening anymore today. And like there's sort of a weird dissonance there. But I would love if you have anything that you want to share, Aaron. You probably would know more about this stuff than I do, maybe. I don't know.
Probably about 10 years too young for the real cuts of it, and actually probably 30 years too young for like when the original sort of Stonewall riots and whatnot were actually happening. I generally felt like I've had a kind of a very good positive experience of being a gay person living through life, but always just had the workload of dealing with we can't live in this country because we're not going to get a visa, or I'm going to have to be mindful when I'm in this country because there's no legal protections, or when I go here, this is going to happen. And also just being kind of constantly aware of the language that I use, and also just being constantly aware of my kind of physical safety. So I probably internalized a lot of the kind of the burdens that I have to kind of bear. And I think back to, what it could have been like 50 years ago, how awful it could have been then. And I think, well, relative to that, it's actually pretty good today. But that's not a very fair thing for the future generations to have to deal with. Like, 'cause I think no young person today no family should have any reason to sort of ostracize their kids, no friends, no school, no university, no workplace. It should just be like, oh yeah, this is just another facet of who you are. You didn't choose this. It's just who you are, just like anything else about you. It's very boring. I mean, who cares? And it's just another facet of life. We're not going to dwell on it. We're just going to embrace you and accept the fact that we've got this huge diversity of people in the world, and this is just another aspect of that diversity.
Yeah. So to wrap things up, so like, how can people be like good allies and like create like a welcoming space in general, like especially in UNSW and other universities? What can they do better for the LGBTQ plus students?
I think the main thing is just being flexible with how you think about things and keeping an open mind, being open to change. Because with queer people, a lot of the time they do change their mind on things like gender. I didn't immediately one day go, oh, yep, I am non-binary. That it's a whole process, and you have to allow people to go through that at their own pace and support them through that.
Today we talked a lot about how a lot of these problems come from not being exposed to people who are different to you in some way, right? And so I think one way that people become better allies is if they understood people who are different to them, in this case talking about queer people, but like I guess it works in general. It's like learn more about what are the queer people doing, learn more about, I don't know, the culture, what are queer people, what are all these words people keep saying. That would probably help because then they would understand it more, and like maybe it would be a bit more like race in the sense that we understand, okay, there are different like races and cultures and they do think differently and that's okay. Maybe it would be like that if people understood it more.
Yeah, I think sort of like on a day-to-day level, sort of consciously making room for people who are different to you. Not necessarily like you don't have to sort of every time someone asks a question go, what about the gays? But I think, in terms of like when you make decisions and sort of look at things, think about like, how might this decision impact people who are different to me? And like, just in an everyday sense, recognize that, like Aaron's touched on, like humans are so like within a person, there are so many different things. And like the better we get at treating each other like complicated human beings, the better the world will be.
And I think what's nice for universities to try to do is to use whatever levers of control they have, but actually where people are acting as allies, or where people can actually be champions, or where students or staff can actually kind of be held up as examples. Because it reminds people, I think it just reminds everybody about the diversity across the board. So yes, today maybe you're being held up as an example because of your sexuality, but actually that will help tomorrow. That will help somebody else because of some issue of ableism, and the day after that it'll help a different person because of ethnicity, and the day after that it'll help somebody because of their diminished rights that they actually have. So today you're an advocate for one aspect of who you are, but because it reminds people to think differently each and every day about all of these different dimensions that we want to encourage everyone to think about. So I think we're one of a bigger army of all the different dimensions of diversity that we want to have out there, and we have to play our part, not just for other lesbian, gay, transgender people, but actually for all the people who are in a minority. And I think if all the minorities gang up, then we become a majority.
I think that's a great way of putting it, that I guess like just as a reminder of like we're not the only minorities, and we can definitely make it easier for other minorities just by championing that. And I guess lastly, is there any advice that you would give maybe to anyone listening to this now?
Try on nail polish. It's amazing. You don't have to be gay or female to wear nail polish.
I don't know. Be careful. It might awaken something within you. I don't know if I recommend.
Embrace who you are. I think, especially if you're watching this and you're in uni, this is a time to define who you want to be for the rest of your life. Become the kind of person that you want to be for the rest of your days, and be embracing of the differences of others. Stand up when you see other people getting downtrodden, and stand up for who you want to be and who you are on the inside and who you'd want the world to see you on the outside. And this is a time to kind of define yourself and be brave. I think if you're not brave, then the next generation behind you will be a little less brave. And then everyone, all the fights that people have had in the past will go backwards. So just take the chance and be a little bit brave in uni. And I would hope, if you're in computer science and engineering, I would hope you'd understand that, like, your head of school is gay, and nobody. If you see anything, this is the one thing I would say though, is if you see anything that you think is kind of going against this kind of inclusive culture that we want to have, like, let me know, because we will want to make, we won't want to stamp anything out that we think is, going against our inclusive culture. So do stand up for each other, stand up for yourself, and become who you want to be for the future. And if you see anything, say something and let me know, because I'm always listening.
Even if this doesn't help, like, in the moment, you get better at navigating this stuff. Like as time goes on, it doesn't necessarily, like, I think the world does get better, but also, like, it gets easier navigating being queer because, part of it is your skin gets thicker, but, you find more people like you, but you know yourself better and you get more confident in yourself. And, like, that doesn't help someone who's having a really rough time with, gender and sexuality stuff right now. But, like, I definitely think that, like, as time goes on, it does get easier just through getting better at being yourself.
Right.
Yeah, that's something that I had. Like, we've all had the advice to be yourself, and it's good advice. But one thing I found was like, okay, I've got to be myself. Thank you so much, King. But how do I know if I'm doing that? Like how? And it was hard for me to be myself. And one good bit of advice I got was not being yourself, or like hiding how you truly feel about something, or like acting in a way that you think is like what the other person wants to hear, but not who you truly are. Any of those kind of things is denying the other person the freedom to choose whether they want to, like, hang out with you or talk to you or whatever. And when I first heard that, I was like, what do you mean? But I realized it's like, oh, well, if someone asks you, I don't know, if you feel like sort of hiding your identity from someone, they don't get to choose whether they want to invite you to their party or talk to you or whatever, because they don't know how you really are. You're trying to, like, deny them that choice. And, like, sometimes you're doing that because you're like, well, they might beat me up if I tell them. So, like, totally fair. But I realized that, like, oh, sometimes I'm, like, denying these people the freedom to choose, but I actually don't want to do that. It would actually be better if I was myself and they didn't like it and we stopped hanging out, because otherwise I'd have to keep hiding it forever. So that's actually good advice.
Yeah. Thank you all for that advice, especially also Aaron, knowing that if there's any issues in computer science, we can go straight to the top.
And there's a lot of people in the school. Like, when you look at the admin structure, like, there's lots of, like, there's heads of subject, there's people who are looking after equity, diversity, and inclusion, there's people looking after the international students, people looking after the undergraduates. teaching, research, like there's, it's a whole team of people who have different responsibilities, and anything that anybody would face, any type of discrimination, be it around your sexuality or anything else, touches on not just my job, but touches on like dozens of other people's jobs. So it's a real team within the school. Like, they always say, the arc of moral history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that is true. And now in UNSW and in the school structure, it's not just me, it's the whole team of people, all the tutors, all the staff. I think you'll find lots and lots of allies within all of CSE who will kind of raise these things up like the student representatives, and they'll flag these issues up, and hopefully they'll get dealt with at a kind of at a close level. Because I think a lot of it can be nudging. People say something and then somebody else goes, look, that's not who we are. That's not who you really want to be. So I think a lot of what we need to do is at the kind of low level nudging between people to kind of remind each other that's not who they want to be. And it's only when it comes up to me does it actually become very serious. So yeah, it's a big team in CSC, which is a really lovely place to work.
That is awesome to hear. And I think that brings us to the end of this podcast today. Thank you guys so much for coming in coming in virtually. And it's been really great. It's been nice also, I don't know about you, but just to like be queer computer science people and talk about it is not something that I've like, I think this is a great opportunity. Like this was a great chance to get to do that. And yeah, thank you for all of your amazing thoughts.
But where were the suggestions of all the queer features that people need to put into programming languages? Like, how do you need to change programming languages so they can adapt? Where's that kind of research insight that I'm looking for here? No. Look at all the industry people shaking their heads with "Whoa!" I'm sorry, Alex. I'm sorry, Emma.
I was thinking, I'm sorry, Aaron, for what you must have been through.
I mean, VS Code is pretty rainbow already, so
finally representation.
If any of the listeners want to hear more from CSC Soc Media, we're releasing new content every single week. And we've actually got a podcast with Aaron Quigley himself, more about lecturing, that's coming out later, probably next month. So yeah, stay tuned and thank you for listening.